Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody, Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, co-host of the show, Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors is here. Kevin, glad to have you.
Great, good to be here.
And a frequent and favorite guest of ours, former Governor Bob Wise, joining us again. Bob, so glad you're here to talk about federal news.
Always good, and there is some news.
Yeah, well, we know there was quite a bit of gridlock. I guess 6 months of gridlock. So yeah, that's lengthy. But there's finally some news on the education funding front. Would you mind filling us in on that, please?
Sure. And let's talk about the spirit of St. Patrick's Day week, Tim and Kevin. I would diagnose this bill as there is some new green that's available, not as much as there could be. So it's a 3-leaf shamrock, perhaps not a 4th. But important that there are some increases. So little stage setting, if you remember back on October the 1st, when Congress should have passed an appropriation bill for education and a number of other functions, it had not. So it kept passing what's known as continuing resolutions, which were level funding. And finally, last week, it did come to agreement, passed the bill, the president signed it. And so this is for the balance of this year, and that goes to October 1st of this year. The balance of this year, this is what schools and districts are going to be looking at. And I want to set this another stage, which is, let's remember, these aren't the record increases that we've been seeing in the past. So what do we have? On Title I, most significantly, there was $1 billion increase. That's $17.5 billion. But that's not chump change, but it's about 6%. The original bill that passed the House of Representatives was around 50% increase. So 6% increase for Title I, significantly, I think, increases particularly in social emotional learning. Everyone's concerned about mental health right now. A very significant increase, $95 million from like 5 or 10 million originally for mental health counselors. And so reflecting the great concerns that people are having coming out of COVID. And so also record increase, $45 million increase on top to make $75 million for community schools initiative. And I know California certainly is putting a lot of money into community schools. So those are some of the top lines. What is very significant, Tim, and which was very disappointing to a lot of people, is the Congress in this bill did not extend the waivers on meals, on student meals. And so what that means is that additional flexibility is set to expire on June the 30th, just at a time when people are trying to do summer feeding. So we'll come back and talk about that one more in a minute. I do want to, so what does this mean? And perhaps there are some other conclusions to come to, is this is the end of the era of rapid increases that we saw during COVID. The 3 stimulus packages, concluding with the American Rescue Plan, what are known as ESSER funds. That's all the record amount of dollars we're going to get. And I would predict from now on, look to essentially level appropriations for education, if not slightly declining.
Right. Well, one of the things I wanted to kind of hop in here a little on a couple of observations. One is, I mean, it is really kind of disappointing, and you and I both talked about this, about sort of the prognosis for the future isn't good because of what we know the political landscape looks like for November. Is that, obviously President Biden has had a very divided Congress, just razor thin majority in order to get anything done. They've used a lot of, very important maneuvers in order to get what we have gotten done, but that the future sort of suggests that the president, who's about to do another budget, I think it's due in a week or so, is going to have a bunch of proposals like what he did last year, but with a change in Congress, there's a likelihood he won't get that. So I think the important thing is for people not to get too excited about what may be in a proposal to only have what happened this year, which is, remember, he was going to triple the funding for Title I. He wanted to get to the 40% on special ed over a multi-year period. Those huge agenda items were dashed by what happened this time, to the degree that he put some really bold, ambitious stuff. Not that we don't want him to put it on the table, that's a great thing. But I think people need to have real realistic expectations about the future of big increases in federal funding. And I think you've really put that on the table.
Yeah, good point, Kevin. We've been incredibly rich in proposals. The problem is that we're very poor in terms of what's the outcome. And when Buy Back Better went down for the umpteenth time, when Buy Back Better went down, that really signaled the end. And so that's why these ESSER dollars are so important. And that's also why it is critical. There's a move afoot now, because ESSER is essentially the largest amount of money that's been pumped into K-12. And I might add the $350 billion that went to state and local governments that could be used to support K-12.
Right.
These are the largest amount we've seen in my lifetime. And so there's a move now to extend the time that districts have to use these federal ESSER dollars. Right now they expire in 2024. 30 organizations, most of which are represented by folks watching this webinar. 30 organizations have written the Department of Education. An organization I'm working with is one of them, asking for an extension to 2026, so that we don't have to operate under the use it or lose it, but district leaders have the time to take the ESSER dollars that they have left and think about, I really want to change this for the better, as opposed to, I've got to pump these dollars, get them committed right now. And of course, there are valid reasons as well. The supply chain problems have meant not being able to get the equipment you needed. You've been trying to make capital investments in your schools. So lots of reasons, but that's something. So my conclusion is no more federal dollars coming in terms of massive increases.
Yeah.
Use the ESSER dollars you've got, and then also be prepared to lobby, to advocate with your local representatives, not only to extend the time to use ESSER, but also, if you really feel strongly about the flexibility in the school food waiver, then make sure people understand how important that is. Congress could still reverse that, but it'll get difficult with each month that passes.
Yeah, and the entity that should be more concerned about that in California is actually state government. And the reason why is because the governor has made the pledge and the commitment to do universal school meals and putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak. So he's committed to that, but the idea was embedded in that great opportunity for schools to have that. I think he expected that the Biden proposal might be successful, was that districts needed to draw down the maximum were entitled to draw down of federal funds first, and they would be there to pick up the difference. Well, now the difference is going to be big, because to the degree the governor is committing to universal meals and the federal government's not there, it's going to be the state of California that's going to want to lobby real hard, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, to see that revisited somehow. So that's big. The other thing I thought I would mention too, just to put things in context for California, is you alluded to the increase that is in the $1.5 trillion package for special ed. It's just under $500 million. What's interesting about it is the governor is being applauded here for his proposal of an increase next year in next year's budget of exactly $500 million. It's actually, there's another component to it that deals with kids with disabilities that are our youngest children here. The combination's $1 billion, but the more general base building part of it for the special ed based funding piece, $500 million just for the state of California. And you think about what the president and Congress deal was $500 million for the entire country. So, we're doing the right things here in California, but it puts in perspective how little of an increase that was in this package for education. But again, one of the things we can't be ingrates about is that it is an increase. And there have been years where we all know we've lived them when we've seen budget cuts and that sort of thing. So we can just hope that some political dynamics in the future can bring Republicans and Democrats together around a couple of key issues, early education being one of them. And I think you forecast, Bob, in the past that you thought there's some sentiment in Congress, perhaps bipartisan sentiment, on the issue of early education.
I think so, and particularly coming out of COVID, when every family in the country had to deal with early education, early child development issues. But it's going to be another day, and it wasn't reflected particularly. There's some increase for early education, was not really reflected in this appropriations bill.
Got it. Great.
Well, thanks for that update on DC and Kevin. Actually, this is an issue around the country, but obviously attendance has suffered throughout the pandemic and still continues to suffer. This is a red hot issue because obviously attendance is the way the schools are funded. So Kevin, can you talk a little bit about the COVID attendance relief issues that are going on in the state right now?
Right. So there's a very big issue underway right now. Many districts have heard from us and advocates up here in Sacramento about pressing the administration on a proposal that they're actively considering, which is to do more than just the proposal that the governor put out in January, which was good on its own. That is the 3-year rolling average relative to declining enrollment, so that we help the almost 60% of districts now in the state that are in decline. But we know we've had this really anomalous impact to attendance as a result of COVID. And that 3-year rolling average could be helped a lot if they just added one more dimension. And that would essentially be to protect LEAs for what was that decline and get us closer to the percentage that was used in terms of the number of kids pre-COVID. So for the 2019-20 school year. So what we're talking about doing is calculating for ADA purposes for 2021-22 only. We would only have it to be that year. In addition to the 3 years, the 3-year average, LEAs would take the higher of their actual 2021-22 ADA or their 2021-22 enrollment, adjusted by the attendance percentage that you had in 1920. So it's a little more nuanced. It's not the same as doing a hold harmless where you get the same dollar amount that you got in 1920, but in fact, you would get that same attendance percentage, and it's viewed as a compromise. Well, we really want to push them in that direction because, again, they have that 3-year rolling average, which is a good first step, but we want them to make this proposal even better. So hundreds of school districts are signing on to communications to their legislators, talking about how important it is. Many of the statewide associations, many of you that are watching, are going to be part of legislative visits with your respective associations in the coming weeks. And we want that to be sort of top of the list. So we wanted to make sure everybody was aware of this issue.
Thanks so much for your efforts there, Kevin. And once again, Capital Advisors is helping lead the way on this important issue. So we'll keep you posted on future episodes as this story plays out. Want to touch on something at the federal level that Bob had mentioned, and that was social emotional health being a big issue. And if you saw President Biden's address, he actually called out the TikTok platform for basically their if they're harmful to students under 18, children under 18, as a platform. It's actually a national investigation. The California Attorney General is part of this investigation. And it is something to be aware of because the amount of time that students are on these platforms, some of the behaviors that happen on those platforms actually directly impact those students' mental health. And sometimes, in some cases, their willingness to participate in learning. So it is a huge issue for schools today. There are some platforms like Instagram who've recently changed some of the rules for children under 18, as far as being able to mention friends that aren't necessarily part of your circle, and then also putting in a timeout warning for students that are using or overusing the platform. So it is a huge issue. TikTok is in the crosshairs of DC right now. And I think there's something that you want to be aware of as an administrator. Make sure your teachers are also in the loop and that they're educating children about the potential harm from some of these platforms that do get overused. With that, Kevin, I want to jump in on SB 976. Can you fill us on that Universal Preschool Act, please?
Yeah, I mean, this piece of legislation by Senator Connie Leyva, who is the chair of California's State Senate Education Committee, is definitely sort of shaking up the conversation relative to early ed in the state. As everybody knows, the governor has had this very ambitious plan to create what will essentially be an entirely new grade in California public education that would be TK. So the TK program has gotten a whole lot of focus. And as we talk about UTK or universal TK, there's a debate going on about whether or not we ought to just be having universal preschool. The governor actually tries to straddle the two issues by having big new investments in preschool for 3-year-olds, and to the degree that those state preschool programs are able to accommodate all 3-year-olds and still have room, he would welcome then you doing extending it to eligible 2-year-olds. What Senator Leyva wants to do is have a program that's universal preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds and not have this TK dynamic to it. And one of the things that she's trying to address here is the fact that even on the national stage, when we talk about early learning, it's usually done in sort of or captured by describing preschool initiatives, universal preschool efforts, and even the president supports that. The TK kind of dynamic was really started at a time in California when we just didn't have the funds to do anything in a really broad base. So the idea was to say, well, why don't we do this where we expand the eligibility for what would be of a 2-year cycle for kindergarten, have this TK program, and then based on moving the age eligibility ever so slightly over time, you could ultimately end up capturing a program for all 4-year-olds. So if you listen to Senator Leyva talk about this, it's kind of that was a Band-Aid approach to doing expanded early education. And that really the right way to do it, since we've got the resources, is we should just do all in on a universal preschool approach. The other issue that she raises is that people are really having a kind of an interesting time navigating between what does this curriculum look like? Is it kindergarten or is it preschool? What is TK? How does it fit? And we know that early ed professionals and people that do early learning really understand sort of the dynamics of what ought to be offered at different age levels in terms of age appropriate. But that if you're a kindergarten teacher, in all likelihood, you signed up for a program that you knew going in, you're dealing with very young kids, but they've already been potty trained. People that sign up for preschool know when they're doing preschool, they know exactly what they're getting, which is they're getting kids that haven't gone through that sort of dimension. And even our facilities don't anticipate, the really younger kids, and they're expensive to sort of retrofit the classroom and the bathrooms and everything to make sure you're accommodating these kids. Whereas if you just go all in for a universal preschool approach, you kind of address some of these issues. And that's really what she's helping to really spur that debate at the Capitol. And again, the governor has put such a huge amount of his own political capital into the idea of universal TK that I think sort of when all things get sorted out, you'll probably still have, again, bigger investments in preschool in the state, and definitely an investment in TK. I'm suspecting it's just going to get hashed out over the next number of months about where we end up with both of those and what is the investment in each, and is there a way to sort out some of these policy questions. So just wanted to point out that that's an ongoing debate. Districts, meanwhile, are trying to figure out what are they anticipating that they're going to be involved with having to provide, having to offer, and that's causing some headaches by itself. Just the idea that at some point here, this becomes this mandate that some school districts are just not prepared to meet yet.
Well, thanks for filling us in on that, Kevin, and obviously important stuff to keep our eye on. So I wanted to just follow up. I know we talked about cybersecurity last show with John Harrington, and actually just the lack of funding and support around cybersecurity. We're starting to see some states take action. New York set up basically a council to oversee cybersecurity for state and local governments in the state. New Mexico reacted to Albuquerque Public Schools being shut down for 2 days by a cyber attack, by the state actually requesting $45 million to support schools for 3 years around cybersecurity. So we're not necessarily seeing it at the national level. We're starting to see states take some action. And again, if you have a chance and you're talking to your legislators, I would definitely squeak the wheel about cybersecurity. It's getting tougher to sort of navigate and more expensive. Insurance gets more expensive, and fixing the problems once they happen is becoming more expensive and more challenging. So when you have those opportunities, please take some time to advocate for some cybersecurity funding for our schools. That's ongoing, something that we desperately need, and we're starting to see states take action on that. Kevin, I know we talked a little bit last time as well about Raise the Base. Can you just refresh our memory on that Raise the Base campaign? And I don't have a pin yet. I don't know if it's lost in the mail or something, but I was looking for that pin. It's just not, yeah. He's showing off.
The Raise the Base campaign. And we did, I think, have a link last time. I'm going to probably keep mentioning this on our broadcast just to remind it to people, because we've got about 200 school districts that have signed up. We obviously want a whole lot more. We've got 1,000 school districts out there. The idea, again, is to put the legislature on notice that we really want to see some action on raising those LCFF base funding levels. And this is the year to do it. There's all kinds of conversations about different ways of doing that. There's some conversations about, let's just give a big, giant, massive COLA to school programs. Another debate is about moving from attendance and ADA to an enrollment base, which has fiscal implications, although that bill's got some technical problems with it, I think, and it's going through amendments, and I don't know that it's going to fix them. But the bill that we really like is AB 1614 by Al Martucci, that raises the base on LCFF by 11% beyond COLA. And now obviously we get a 6% COLA, which is what I think we're going to end up at. This would be really a significant increase for LCFF. Again, he'll probably have to do some negotiating on that as well. But we want to really underscore the arguments that, too much of the money comes at a one-time or incredibly restricted. The base funding for public schools in the state is suffering. We're not talking about, raising taxes or doing anything else. We're talking about utilizing what's in the Prop 98 guarantee more decidedly toward bolstering the base funding than it does other kinds of choices. So we're not trying to push for a bigger hunk of general fund money to go into Prop 98 than is required under the guarantee. We just want what is there, what will be spent on education, to be a little more proportionally spent on the base. And that's what this does. So we invite people to join us. Again, we're going to have that link on here again. And then I got a whole bag of buttons. I got to figure out a way to get this out to people, but we'll definitely do that. And I'm going to ship one overnight to you, Tim. So on the next broadcast, you're wearing your button.
Perfect. Yes, I'm happy to help support that great cause. And thanks for the work that you're doing there, Kevin. Yeah. So with that, Bob, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Kevin,
sorry, go ahead.
Kevin just reminded me about preserving what you've got. One of the efforts that was made in Congress this last time that was not successful, but it'll be back. Some folks wanted to claw back, to take back some of the federal stimulus relief dollars to pay for new COVID relief. The result was that the new COVID relief didn't pass, but there wasn't this clawback. The folks who want to claw back or take it, the argument is, if you haven't spent it by now or committed it, give it back to us, the federal government. So please be cautioning your members of Congress about clawing back, because you still have it. You need to commit it. We're trying to get an extension on it, but the folks who want to claw back are coming back. So that's another important issue to be aware of.
We got some defanging and declawing to do, I guess.
Yeah, and I want one of those buttons.
yeah, absolutely. And so thank you so much, Bob. And then Kevin, I guess, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up this week?
No, looking forward to the next time we're visiting.
Okay, well, I know CASBO is coming up at the end of the month. Hopefully we'll see some of our friends there. I know Kevin's got some speaking opportunities, and maybe we'll bring in some buttons to the conference as well. And I want to thank you both for being on, and we'll see everybody in a couple of weeks for a new episode.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.